right. Multiple Toymakers space figure. 1960s. Looks like it's seen a lot of use or display. It looks like it maybe was in a display case because it's so aged on one side. And I'd gone ahead and ordered it without realizing that I already had this in a blue, but this is a different blue, even if it is that aged. We'll give him a good scrub. So while it's tempting to say something like condition likely played a significant role in why the value of this was so low, to tell you the truth, there's a glut of them in the market right now. I wouldn't be paying more than about $8 or $12 a piece for them. For whatever reason, there just seemed to be a lot going around. And for also whatever it's worth, the age and wear on the guy, to me, is just authenticity of it being an older example. And for $1, I'm pleased as punch with it, no matter what shape it's in. Good scrub, I'm sure he's going to look just fine. Some warm, soapy water. And I have a red example of him as well. And had very early fallen prey without knowing it to these recast versions from probably the early to mid 1990s, likely made in Mexico. None of these have any markings on their bottoms. The figures do have a number on them, which I think corresponds to the mold position rather than their part of any nomenclature having to do with the set itself. But even compared to the others, visually it's somewhat difficult to tell them apart. These are made of a softer, pliant plastic. I call it Army Man plastic. And this is a stiffer plastic that will that has gone fragile or is somewhat delicate, and I will not bend that again anytime soon that way. But this is definitely a vintage piece, and I can use these larger ones in artworks, or at least these right here. I thought about painting them, but you know, I decided I don't like how these plastic figures look, or I never do when they're painted. Sometimes when they come out of the factory, that's one thing, but user paint, owner paint jobs usually just don't do anything for me. But there's another vintage piece from the early 1960s. I think these were on sale by 1962, 1963. At or about the same time as Operation Moonbase. And not by Marx. These are not Marx space figures. The closest that Marx got to it in the 60s in this size were their Apollo figures, who are in an EVA pressure suit with a PLSS personal life support system backpack on it. The MPC figures are all in a skin-tight flight suit that wouldn't work in a vacuum on the moon, and they came with attachable equipment. None of these figures, their equipment has survived, but they'd come with a set of air tanks you could strap on, and some other fascinating accoutrements for them to make use with. The Marx figures will also be marked Marx on the bottom. At least they're large. 1970 was, I think, the year that these premiered for sale. So that's Marx. These are MPC. Multiple Toymakers was the shelf name of the company, and eventually I think they dropped the MPC moniker to avoid confusion with the model making company, and it was Multiple Toymakers. I like them. They're cool, and I had a couple as a kid. I'm pretty sure one of mine was red. Another one was probably blue. These are not them. My childhood space toys were long since parted from me, and part of this quest is to obtain them back. Whether I don't think I have this pose. I don't remember him having a gun. And indeed, my parents, the way that one of the ways that these were sold was that they'd be in a bin, and you'd pick them out and take them to the cash register for 50 cents or $1, whatever they cost. And I can see my parents avoiding anything with weapons because it would make me want more toys. Very important addition in the Space Toy legacy. Everybody had them for a while. At least if you were around in the early 60s to mid 1970s, you had some MPC Spacemen. Unless you just weren't into space toys, I guess. I don't know. Maybe that. Jeez. Alright, so here are these 4 guys lined up. And again, which one is the recast? Which ones are the original 1960s pieces? One of the only ways to tell is the color of plastic used. The originals are going to be in your primary colors, red, blue, green. I've seen a yellow one, and white, and I think they did a gray, but it's more of a silver. The recasts are all in this smoky kind of gray, which has gone brittle over the years, and I just noticed something. It may be peculiar to this particular piece I have, but if you look closely, his hand is just about touching his helmet, whereas on the others there's a noticeable gap between his hand and the helmet. Once you're holding them in your hand, you can tell, comparing them, how the one in gray has gone stiff. It's a semi-brittle plastic, or it has become one since the mid-90s, when they were probably cast in Mexico, where the originals are all the same supple Army Man, flexible, I don't know if it's PVC, but that kind of polyurethane plastic from an injection mold. As to what the recasts are worth, honestly, you can get a shoebox full of them for 15 or 20 bucks. $2.50, $3 a piece. Little as you can pay. The recasts are also vintage now as well. Vintage, I think, means anything older than 20 years. But there's a difference, at least in my opinion, between them and the ones that Multiple Toymakers made in the 1960s through early 1970s. It'd be interesting to find out when exactly they stopped making them. If anyone knows, give us a shout.